Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's BizTech Huìhuà chat, the future of green hydrogen. I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing this session today. It's been a really full session. We've got over 100 people registered for this, and I would like to provide a little bit of context to it for you before we begin. I'll be keeping my remarks quite short because we have a very full program, and people have been dialing in from all over the world. Now, I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors at Zien, and Zien has been working very hard to try and keep discussions and dialogue going on some more advancing topics that we see around the world. And hydrogen demand is definitely one of them. Uh, we're also delighted to be doing this in conjunction with CDI, the China Development Institute, our long-term friends who've been working with us for many years on the Global Financial Centers Index. And this particular session on hydrogen demand in the future was something that I personally was very, very keen on. And I'm thrilled to see today on the line a variety of people from all around the world, not just the BizTech chats we wanted originally, which were between Europe and China, but in many other nations have come in today from Japan, from Korea, from the Middle East, and from America. And although he won't be speaking today, a particularly warm welcome to my dear friend Nick Schuess, who's dialing in from Hamburg. Nick has been a fervent adherent and proponent of hydrogen for many, many years, over 35 years, and has created the H2 Stiftung, which we'll hear more of later. Anyway, just to try and set the scene, many of the people here will be experts, but for those who are not, just a quick glance at some figures on hydrogen demand. So hydrogen demand, you can see here at 94 megatons, is a 5% increase on 2020, between 2020 and 21. Demand seems okay. New applications are growing quite rapidly, but I contrast that with where the where the IEA, the International Energy Authority, expects things to go. Is by 2030 to be at around the 180 megaton mark. Now you look at that and you say, well, that's actually a 100% increase. And I'd say in many other industries, that would be quite good over the next sort of 8 years or what have you. But in truth, for a booming industry that's supposed to be supplying the global energy transportation around the world, that seems, given the scale of the climate change challenge, a little low. But our experts today will give us a lot about. So if we move on to the next slide, again, this slide, because one of the slides here are the color codes of hydrogen. It's often said that there are 7 colors in the rainbow, and you can see here that we've already got 6 colors of hydrogen. I'm not quite sure what we're missing, purple or what have you. But despite the terminology in the field, it basically boils down to, do you produce it green, fully renewable using techniques that are emitting absolutely nothing, or do you have variants along the way that are in some way polluting, with possibly, I guess, pink, the most interesting outlier there, simply because it depends on where you fall on nuclear energy being green and renewable, or whether you think nuclear energy shouldn't be. So we're going to be hearing a lot of those color codes, but at the core of the debate for me is really, what is this? Is this a transportation mechanism, or is it an end-use production mechanism? But whatever it is, and one of the reasons are quite interested in it, whatever hydrogen is, it is going to be traded. And that is one of the reasons we would like to keep these discussions going, because at the trading level, we feel that we have a lot that we can bring to bear. Now, the program today is fairly straightforward. We're going to try and get a number of people, as you can see on this slide here, we're going to try and get a number of people to present. Mike, can you? Thank you. I'm going to try and get a number of people to present so that we can actually have a decent amount of questions, comments, and discussions. Mike and I have assembled a crowd with the help, I say the enormous help of CDI. So we'll be starting with Dr. Leo Yu, then we'll be moving back here into the UK for Hugo Spowers, who's an engineer with River Simple, which is doing hydrogen automobiles transportation, back to China, back to the UK for an analysis view, back to China on some of the sciences, back to the UK for element 2, which is trying to build hydrogen stations. In the background, and when it comes to questions and comments and observations, we have Marcus and Timo from the H2 Stiftung that Nicholas Xu has founded. And H2 Stiftung is trying to build the global market, and we'll be hearing more about that from Germany. So it's going to be bouncing around quite a bit. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask the speakers to please keep to time. And could I also please people out there, because I can hear it from them, please check if you're not speaking, please put yourself on mute. I've heard a dog and a sneeze and a few other things. So just please use your mute buttons. And so with no further ado, asking Mike Wardle, who's behind the scenes and will be leading the question time. Mike, would you please hand the floor to Dr. Liu Yu, the Executive Director of the New Energy Research Center, who's with the China Development Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Liu, please take the floor.
Distinguished guests, good morning, good afternoon. I'm going to share with you one of the three most dynamic regions in China, namely the Greater Bay region and its development in hydrogen. As we know, the Greater Bay Area, or the GBA, is one of the important economic powerhouses in China, with a total GDP of 13 trillion. That was in 2022. That accounts for 11% in China's GDP. Economic development is one of the important features in the GBA. But looking back on its energy consumption, it accounts for a large proportion in the total consumption of China. That's roughly 10%. That's to say, the GBA is not only a center of economic development, but also a center of energy consumption. Let's take a look at its energy structure. Well, as for energy mix, the Greater Bay Area has three regions, two special administrative regions, and one province. In terms of primary energy source, Guangdong Province, Hong Kong, and Macau still rely most of the time on fossil fuels. If you look at your left-hand side, the first picture, the first chart shows that coal, natural gas, and fossil fuel still accounts for a large proportion. As for Hong Kong, coal and oil make up 90% or above in its primary energy source. But things are similar in Macau. Oil and gas account for a high proportion, whereas electricity is most of the time generated by fossil fuels. We can see that in the next chart. In terms of installed power, most of them, it's still fossil fuel. That means the primary energy consumption and electricity generation, power generation, are still very much rely on fossil fuel. In the first picture, you can see that thermal power accounts for the highest proportion in Guangdong Province. In 2018, the number was 80 million kilowatt hours. And in Hong Kong, coal-fired power and natural gas have a very high percentage, over 90%. Well, things are similar in Macau. And we can draw a conclusion, namely, we have a very high proportion of installed power capacity relying on fossil fuel, and to reduce carbon and emission, we need to move forward and move towards energy transition, relying on renewable energy. I believe one of the directions, one of the possibilities is, as the theme today shows, is to move forward the energy transition in Greater Bay Area through hydrogen. I believe the moderator and the chairman also said that in the future, we're looking at much higher capacity of hydrogen, and by 2030, it's going to reach a milestone. Given its safety and given its economy, hydrogen has become an important energy source. It's a renewable energy, and its generation is from electrolyzed water, which is very clean. So there is very good outlook for the development of green hydrogen. As for its economics, given lower cost of hydrogen energy storage and the use of renewable energies, hydrogen can be a new way of storing energy. And as a big power in renewable energy, China with energy can avoid waste of power, for example, curtailment of wind and PV power. Speaking of its safety, hydrogen can also feed back to electricity grid, maintaining its reliable operation. And it's useful for China to set up a new type of electricity system featuring renewable energy. So from an energy safety, energy security point of view, hydrogen works as a stabilizer for the national grid. What are the challenges faced by the Greater Bay Area? You can see in the chart on the right-hand side, some cities in Guangdong province proposed to actively develop energy through hydrogen. For example, we have a target of reaching 10,000 hydrogen-powered vehicles and building 200 hydrogen refueling stations. Many cities have their own plans. For example, Guangzhou aims to reach 60 billion of RMB worth of industry for hydrogen, and by 2030, the goal is to reach 200 billion RMB. Foshan is a good example of hydrogen development, and its goal is to reach a 100 billion RMB market by 2030. Likewise, Hong Kong is going to put hydrogen-powered buses on the road this year. Many other cities all came up with an ambitious plan to develop hydrogen. But the reality is, where do we get hydrogen? In what way? In what model? So we can support industrial development and the operation of hydrogen cars, energy storage, and electricity grid. On the left-hand side, you can see some numbers. Take Foshan as a good example of hydrogen. Every day we are talking about 16 to 18 tons of hydrogen, but there is only a capacity of 5 tons per day in this city. Despite its ambitious goals, the shortage of hydrogen, given that only 1/3 of hydrogen-powered vehicles can be put on the road due to the shortage of supply. I think one of the options, given the energy shortage, is to give a strong boost to green hydrogen. And for that, we have to rely on offshore wind. We need to make use of the abundant resources from offline wind power so we can realize localized supply of hydrogen. We believe that's the most important solution to the hydrogen shortage in the Greater Bay Area.
21.1% is from the byproduct hydrogen from industries. There is only 1.5% is provided by the electrolysis of water for Guangdong province and also the GBA. The major share is still from the industrial hydrogen production, which cannot ensure our industrial needs. In the future, we can learn from the European countries, with UK included. We would like to make more explorations on how we can produce more hydrogen using the offshore wind energy in the future with the production cost going down. That will be very potential. Later, we will elaborate on this. We know that Guangdong is endowed with a lot of resources. We are with very rich offshore wind, and we also have the planning for the wind power plants over 3,030 million kilowatts. And we have a lot of island resources to promote the development of hydrogen production. In the future, with the decreasing cost and also the lowering technological barriers, the cost for offshore wind hydrogen production will be going down, which will be much lower than that has been introduced by our moderator. We estimate that the production cost will be about 10 yuan per kilowatt hour. In the future, if the GBA can promote the hydrogen production using offshore wind energy, and we can develop the upstream, downstream. In this case, by 2025, the output value for the hydrogen will be about 1 trillion yuan. By 2035, it will amount to 5 trillion yuan, and that will be very conducive for the construction of maritime ocean economy, which include the marine bonds, blue energy, and we can also promote the hydrogen production using the offshore wind energy, which include power generation, hydrogen production, the seawater desalination, the maritime ranches storage, the vessel hydrogen refueling, so as to have the net zero development of the islands. That is all my presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very, thank you very much. And we're going to move swiftly on to our next speaker to hear from Hugo Spowers, the founder and chief engineer at River Simple.
I'm speaking from River Simple. We are a sustainable car company that I set up 20 years ago. Explicitly, we are a sustainable car company rather than a hydrogen car company. We don't argue about whether solar PV or wind turbines are going to win the renewable energy race. They're just different and we need them both. And I think the same is true of batteries and hydrogen. However, nothing can be as sustainable as a hydrogen car for the sort of range to which we've become accustomed. So there is a sense that battery cars have won the race. There's a lot of battery cars around. There's very few hydrogen cars. But I think it's quite explicable, really, when you look at the maturity of the technologies. Battery cars are not new. We've had them as long as petrol cars. The car on the left broke the land speed record in 1899, running on batteries. It was the first car to do 100 kilometers an hour. And this is on the right, a picture from Mercedes-Benz website, claiming it as the world's first fuel cell vehicle. I think it's probably, strictly speaking, the world's first road registered fuel cell vehicle. But nonetheless, you can see that there's a lot of work to get all that technology in the back that fills the back of the van under the bonnet of a car at the price that customers can afford with the reliability that we've come to expect. And by and large, apart from countries in the Far East, the European and American manufacturers have really not been investing in technology over the last 25 years that they must have known that they were going to need. So now that the regulations for tailpipe emissions have come in, there's a rush to produce zero emission cars, and the only thing we're ready to produce in Europe is battery cars. And we have to sell them to avoid the fines, and we can't sell them if we say this is just a stopgap measure, we're going to sell you something else in 5 years' time. So I think that probably every car manufacturer in the world now has a serious hydrogen vehicle program, including the ones who deny it. There is one mantra that we don't entirely agree with, and that is that we need hydrogen for trucks because they're large and we'll do cars with batteries. We do need hydrogen for trucks, that's absolutely true, but it's nothing to do with their size. And there's two examples I can give to illustrate that. One is you can easily make a battery electric HGV if you're happy to do 50 miles a day, but it's not what HGVs do. It's the range and the uptime. The other example down below is that the only mature market for hydrogen mobility today is in materials handling, forklifts and pallet carriers. I believe that over 30% of food in American warehouses is now moved by hydrogen. And a pallet carrier, one man with a joystick moving a single pallet, is not a large device. So clearly size isn't the issue. It's again utilization. And this principle applies irrespective of size or weight, from a pallet carrier right the way up to a forklift truck. And this is showing the longer range vehicle problem with battery cars. The orange dots are the battery cars available on the market today in the UK. And as you can see, there's a strong correlation between cost and range. The range is the vertical scale, and the horizontal scale is the total cost of ownership for 3 years of one of these cars. And you can see that a lot more money buys you a little more range. Up at the top is a red dot, and that's a basic Ford Fiesta. And however much money you've got, there is no battery car on the market that you can buy that gives you the equivalent range to the basic Fiesta. The green dots are hydrogen cars. You can see they're above that band. And the market we're aiming at is the equivalent cost of ownership of a Golf, but with equivalent range as well. And with hydrogen, we feel that absolutely this is commercially viable here and now. Those longer range battery cars have enormously expensive batteries. Our car weighs less than the battery does in any of the long range battery vehicles available today. And unfortunately, though a battery electric powertrain is very efficient, the efficiency of the vehicle depends also on its weight. And if you have a heavy vehicle with a very high powertrain efficiency, it's still an inefficient vehicle. And we can see that with petrol cars. They range between 20 and 23% powertrain efficiency across the board today. But the fuel efficiency figure of the vehicle varies wildly. So clearly there's something else to the story than powertrain efficiency. And weight is the chief issue. As you build a battery car for longer and longer range, you need more and more batteries. Each battery takes you less far than the previous battery because the car is getting heavier and less efficient. And we have got a serious problem with resource allocation. This is a summary by Der Spiegel of some International Energy Agency figures on raw materials needed to hit net zero. And this is if we're going to do it with battery vehicles. And you can see it's a 13-fold increase in global production in the next in 7 years' time, and 25-fold by 2040. And it's not just battery vehicles that need these raw materials. The whole renewable world is much more dependent on critical materials than a fossil-based world that can muddle through with steel and alloy. And we need better ways of allocating resources, and certainly putting 900 kilos of raw materials into a battery for single personal use is not a practical solution in the long run. That's, by comparison, what would be needed for hydrogen vehicles. There is not nearly enough emphasis, we believe, on the business model of the industry. At the moment, if we sell cars, we make more money by selling more cars. So we're rewarded for maximizing resource consumption. And I don't see how we can ever have a sustainable industrial society based on rewarding industry for the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. If, on the other hand, you sell the vehicle as a service, much more revenue goes to the vehicle manufacturer. And if it stays on the balance sheet of the manufacturer, they're rewarded for longevity rather than obsolescence, for low running costs rather than high running costs, and it turns efficiency and sustainability more widely into a source of competitive advantage rather than a cost on the bottom line. It also eliminates the economic barriers from bringing these new technologies to market. If you sell cars, you've got to match the extraordinarily low prices of conventional cars today. And to do that, you need to get the volume up. But to get the volume up, you need to get the price down. So it's a chicken and egg. If you sell the service of the vehicle, the pricing to the customer is based on lifetime cost, and end-of-life value recovery, lower operating costs, and longer revenue streams can all offset a higher build cost. So you can come to market at an equivalent price to the customer long before it's as cheap to build. Finally, I'd just like to say a couple of things about green hydrogen and hydrogen production and the transition to a truly renewable energy society. River Simple was set up for environmental reasons. It's our raison d'etre. And clearly the end game has to be 100% carbon-free hydrogen. But I do have serious concerns about how we're getting there. I'm concerned about this rainbow, and I'm concerned about the mantra that the only good hydrogen is green hydrogen. Clearly, this is true in the long term, but it's not going to happen overnight. And we can't insist that new uses of hydrogen have to be in lockstep with green hydrogen. We didn't do it with battery electric cars. We didn't say you can only use a battery electric vehicle if you charge it with green electricity. And it will hobble both the deployment of hydrogen vehicles and the development of green hydrogen production if we put them in lockstep. Obviously, for vehicle deployment, it's harder if we insist on green hydrogen only, if we don't allow cars to tap into the 70 million plus tons of hydrogen that we produce. But also, if electrolytic hydrogen production is to use only green hydrogen, it's not going to be able to operate 24/7. A study for the Welsh Government estimated that to give equivalent yield to a 10 megawatt electrolyser, you'd need to install a 16 megawatt electrolyser, over 50% extra capex if we're going to use green electricity only. And finally, hydrogen from methane is 75% efficient, whereas it's considered our cleanest form of fossil generated electricity at 49%, which brings me back to my first point. From a whole system perspective, we decarbonize quicker if we use green electricity to displace natural gas from electricity production at 49% efficiency, rather than to displace natural gas from hydrogen production at 75% efficiency. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Hugo. And a perspective there from the real industry side of hydrogen and its use. I'm going to now ask Dr. Li Yanfei to take the floor, Professor at the Hunan University of Technology and Business.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for this opportunity for sharing my studies and some ideas. Sorry, the material is still in Chinese, so allow me to switch back to Chinese since we have an interpreter here.
First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude for having such an opportunity to share with you of my studies. My studies are on the hydrogen. I've been working on this topic for many years, starting from 2017, 2018 till now. So within a short period of 4 to 5 years, I have witnessed the rising of the hydrogen. So I would like to elaborate from the policymaking perspective, technological perspective, and also commercial development perspective. The past 4 and 5 years have witnessed the rapid progress of hydrogen in China and even the world at large. I still recall that about 1 year ago, we are talking about the power generation, power grid integration, and also the electricity loading integration. Hydrogen in China's policymaking profile, we considered it as an important energy storage means, but now we are now talking about the PV, wind, hydrogen, and also the energy storage. In this sense, it has become future green energy mix featuring green hydrogen. So I think the changes will be very meaningful and have great implications on us in the future. About 7 years ago, we have conducted research, and I think this research is quite forward-looking. And we put forward that in China, how can we commercialize the production of hydrogen in China?
We started with large-scale demonstration. We proposed this in 2020, and we published a paper in 2021 on a scientific journal. Back then, we interviewed government institutions, scientific institutions, companies, and some international think tanks about energy, and some academia as well. We did 2 rounds of questionnaires. The goal was to help China find and identify proper policies to promote the implementation of large-scale hydrogen projects. That was what we did 3 years ago. But today, there are many large-scale commercial hydrogen projects that have been already implemented. I'll give you our conclusion in a moment. We aim to realize that in 5 years, but actually it was completed in only 2 years. We asked one question: what's the role of green hydrogen in China, and are people satisfied with government support, and how many years does it take to use hydrogen at large scale? The answer was 5 to 10 years, but in reality, this speed has been much more accelerated. In some northern provinces, like Inner Mongolia, if we are talking about green hydrogen projects with annual capacity of 10,000 or more, there are many, but years ago, there was only one project in Zhangjiakou. They used wind power to support the production of green hydrogen, powering their own fuel cell vehicles. Up until now, gray hydrogen have been used. So back then, green hydrogen was only a wishful thinking, and it wasn't reality yet. And we have also learned what challenges people were faced with when it comes to green hydrogen. There were indeed some policy barriers and shortage of infrastructure. We also learned this information. According to the response we received, we came up with this roadmap predicting in which sectors green hydrogen will be looking at a keen demand. Most of the colored boxes circle around midterm, namely 5 to 10 years. Some sectors have moved faster. So China has moved fast in general when it comes to green hydrogen. We thought fossil fuels and CCS would be one of the major methods of hydrogen generation. Hydrogen from renewable energy will pick up in the future, but not yet. We see that the hydrogen pipelines were being built by Sinopec in Beijing and Inner Mongolia. So we believe the large-scale commercial projects have already started. Some experts here mentioned the possibility of international hydrogen trades in the future. I couldn't agree with them more. And we are also actively promoting a project in collaboration with Mongolia. There is an area in Inner Mongolia which sees abundant wind and PV power. Years ago, Mr. Yashi-san from SoftBank Japan proposed a plan to use electricity grid to generate hydrogen. Back then, it was called Asia Supergrid. But it was difficult to put that into reality because technically speaking, it would be extremely difficult to connect everything, and there were energy security concerns. But we believe it's highly likely that we can turn this energy into green hydrogen because they are as tradable as oil and natural gas. The only difference is that we can use green electricity as a medium and trade it as a green commodity in the global market. So in 2021, we started a research project covering different aspects: geopolitical, energy, environment, industry, technology, economy, etc., on how we can turn the project in Inner Mongolia into a real green hydrogen industry, so it can serve the whole Northeast Asian market. We believe China, Japan, and Korea will become the main markets that will see a keen demand for green hydrogen. We believe it's highly likely to develop a huge amount of renewable energy in this region, and that's the region colored in yellow. You can see we can transport hydrogen through some pipelines connecting to Bohai Bay in northeast China, because if we are looking at the routes from Australia to Japan or from Brunei to Japan, this long-haul transportation projects of hydrogen have been very successful in the pilot stage. So technically, it's doable, and we have done some calculation. It's also feasible. So in terms of technology, environment, even geopolitical areas, this project will be very feasible. And we have also learned the possible challenges and solutions. We have done research into the details, and the results of the research were published on a scientific journal in Chinese. We have also drafted a roadmap on the possible actions. Before I close, I'd like to give you some updates on the development of hydrogen in China. As I said, in China, the number is that by 2024, by the end of 2024, we will see the production of 650,000 tons per year. We're talking about individual projects per project. So how can we absorb such a high level of energy? This is even higher than some of the European countries when it comes to the production and usage of hydrogen in the early development stage. China produces hydrogen in certain areas and absorb and use them in local areas, because these hydrogen projects are largely combined with petrochemical, steel making, and other projects. At the end of last year, before early this year, there was a new policy in China being rolled out saying that petrochemical industry will be included in the carbon trade market in China. Against that backdrop, petrochemical companies are highly motivated to deploy technologies and projects around green hydrogen. So green hydrogen will generate profitable returns in carbon trade projects in the future. For the very reason, these hydrogen resources are consumed and absorbed locally, and they're also building pipelines transporting hydrogen from Western China to Eastern China. These pipelines will be built very soon, covering a length of 400 kilometers. This is going to be the very first hydrogen pipeline in China, the only pipeline specifically used for hydrogen. So I'm very optimistic and interested in the development of hydrogen energy in China. At the same time, we are moving forward with a new research project. We predict that the hydrogen industry in China will become a leading industry in the world. If that's the case, China's international cooperation on hydrogen will become an important piece of the puzzle. So we are doing a research project on how China can be better involved in international hydrogen ecosystem. So these are some updates on our recent project, and we look forward to more in-depth cooperation with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Li. Moving swiftly on to Rick Stathers, climate change specialist with Aviva Investors. Rick, over to you.
Great, thank you, and apologies that I haven't got a slideshow, so you'll have to enjoy whatever background is behind me. So I've worked on climate change investment funds for the last 17 years and have been following the debate around hydrogen for a while, and seen the sort of hype bubbles come and go. And I think over the last few years, I've been amazed by the amount of research that has been generated by the discussion around hydrogen, that we're seeing recently. So as we've looked into it, we've looked into what are the potential future uses of hydrogen. And so for this, we have isolated it into, could it be as a source of power? And we, as Hugo said, we don't think it will be an efficient replacement for fossil fuels, where we are seeing the cost declines of renewables and energy storage becoming much more competitive. As such, it may have a role as a form of long duration storage, though even here we're seeing other competing technologies in this space. So nothing certain with regards to power. With regards to heating, we can split this between the residential heating markets and industrial heating. From the residential side, there's a lot of discussion about blending hydrogen into the existing gas pipelines. But as we know, once you get over that 20% blend, it becomes corrosive to the pipeline, so we would need to change out all of the systems and pipe works supplying gas, or in this case hydrogen, to the residential market, making it quite cost prohibitive. And then on top of that, we would look at the efficiencies of a hydrogen boiler versus a heat pump, and we see that the cost efficiencies of a heat pump are 4 to 6 times that of a hydrogen boiler. So we don't see any logical reason why hydrogen will play a role in residential heating. But then, it comes to the other argument is it can provide high levels or intense heat for industrial processes, for steel and aluminium chemicals, for example. And so we do think it may have another potential role in that market, though equally we're also conscious that there are other forms of electrical heating, and whether infrared or that can deliver similar levels of heat. So again, another competitive field for hydrogen. And then we think about transport. So at the moment, you look at the market, it is dominated by electric vehicles. We don't think that is going to be changing anytime soon in the small sort of light vehicle categories. We do see that there are some examples of hydrogen fuel cell buses, for examples, but even here we are seeing the evolution in energy storage and battery power, so that you are going to get the range that you require for heavy good vehicles from batteries, and the downtime is the overnight when you're not allowed to drive anyway. So again, it's facing competition, and there are other markets becoming rapidly established. There is talk obviously within the aviation sector where, you know, this is a sector which doesn't have any clear indication of how it's going to achieve net zero. There are talk of hydrogen flights, but here we have the challenge of the volumetric energy density of hydrogen, and, you know, the ability to store enough to power a long distance flight. So I think the conclusion of where we see the future is that it's not entirely clear. There is a lot of incumbent support for hydrogen, obviously from the fossil fuels, which is obviously attracting a lot of lobbying attention and influence in political debate. But it is a very sort of competitive area, though we think the most likely area will be in the industrial hubs that we've heard about. In terms of sort of the colors of hydrogen, you know, from a climate perspective, obviously we're looking at green hydrogen being the sort of the option that we would all like to see evolve. But you know, the costs of this is dominated by the cost of the electrolyzers and electricity costs. We've seen electricity costs coming down. We're seeing electrolyzer costs declining in a similar way that we've seen solar and wind power decline over the last few years. And just as an aside, I'd add in that the IEA forecasting is notoriously bad on disruptive technology. So we've seen this with its ability to poorly forecast as cost decline and penetration of renewable and solar. We've seen it again recently with its inability to forecast the penetration of electric vehicles. And so I'm sure to Michael's comments at the beginning, we'll probably see it with its inability to actually forecast the uptake of hydrogen as well. But we are seeing the electrolyzers cost declines coming in. But you know, with green hydrogen, similar comment to what Huìhuà was saying, was that, you know, why would you use renewable energy to create green hydrogen? You know, the round trip efficiency from using that to create the hydrogen, which then can be turned back into electricity, is a 31% efficiency ratio. So it's a very inefficient use of green electrons. But you know, and obviously we need to see the scaling up of renewable energy, primarily for the electrification of our global economy first, and then, you know, for additional areas such as you know, green hydrogen secondary. In addition, one of the areas not talked about so far is the water demands of green hydrogen. If we are going to see it going at scale, we have to address the sustainability of fresh, purified water supply. This is a big challenge, obviously. If it's impure, this affects the efficiency of the electrolyzers. Most of the parts of the world where you see sufficient sort of natural resources in terms of solar and wind are also facing water scarcity challenges. So this is another headwind for the generation of green hydrogen. On the blue hydrogen side, we're not very positive on CCS asset technology. It has consistently failed to deliver, and you know, we know that it will never be net zero compliant. You know, it will fail to capture 100% of CO2 from the exhaust stacks of the power stations that are used to generate it. So we would be skeptical about, you know, the overall value of blue hydrogen. But you know, and then also we have the issue of methane leakage in the value chain. So you know, as you're extracting the gas to use to create the hydrogen, there is that leakage there. Obviously, methane has a higher global warming potential than CO2, and so that's a critical issue to be conscious of, you know, as we're looking at this decade, to really start to drive down greenhouse gas emissions. So yeah, so our conclusions are, we're not entirely positive on the future of hydrogen. We do believe that it will have a role. It will not be a primary role. Green hydrogen will probably become more cost effective towards the end of the decade than now, as we see the electrolyzer costs come down. Obviously, we also need to see an increase in carbon pricing coming in, where at the moment we're looking for a carbon price of $100 per ton to make green hydrogen have parity. But obviously around the world there aren't any, there are a few carbon markets, but at the scale we need this, we're not seeing that carbon price occurring currently. So that's our conclusions there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to move swiftly on. We're just running just a little bit behind time, and ask Dr. Zhu Tong to take the floor. Dr. Zhu, over to you.
I will talk in compilation of China's hydrogen development policymaking practices. I will also talk about the problems that exist in the hydrogen field. The development of hydrogen in China is in face of three major issues. Number one, different countries are also in face of the similar issues. Number one, the raw materials for hydrogen production are primarily the fossil fuels, so that will cause great pressure to the emission of carbon dioxide. And we can see the share of the electrolysis of water to produce hydrogen is less than 5%. Similar story in China. So for China, the hydrogen production by the industrial byproducts is about 20%. In 2020, the carbon dioxide emission by producing hydrogen using the fossil fuel has been over 3.3 million tons, accounting for 25% of total carbon dioxide emission. So it is really taking up a very large share. Now, the green hydrogen is not becoming the primary energy mix. To promote the development of the hydrogen will give rise to the carbon dioxide emission from the green hydrogen production. We need to pay attention to this phenomenon. Many localities, cities are trying to promote some hydrogen production projects, but primarily they are green hydrogen production. Secondly, many local governments attach great importance to the development of hydrogen. Anyhow, as we will know, global widely speaking, many countries, which include EU, the UK, Japan, South Korea, they have promulgated now policies for developing clean energy, but the technologies for the hydrogen development are still in the piloting stage. It hasn't been commercialized on a very large scale. Against this backdrop of a planning for the hydrogen and also the establishment of the hydrogen parks has been overheated. That means there are many provinces and cities which have issued and released now planning for the development of hydrogen. According to incomplete statistics, over 70% of the provinces putting forward that they would like to develop the hydrogen, but before the commercial application, over 70% of the provinces and cities would like to have the pilot projects in hydrogen. This will give rise to the waste of resources, money, investment, and low standard investment. Besides, the planning for the hydrogen is quite singular. The utilization of hydrogen is primarily in fossil fuel and also industrial sectors, which include transportation, fertilizers, power generation, etc. According to a report from the International Hydrogen Alliance, around 2013, there will be over 22 end applications while trying to reduce carbon dioxide emission, which include refinery, long-haul transportation, hydrogen refinery, etc. But the pilot projects in China are still concentrated on transportation. So the application scenarios much too singular. We have some buses, public transportation means, and passenger vehicles. The application scenarios are much too monotonous and singular. The greatest application of hydrogen should be in the industrial sector. I believe that will be the most important sectors for the future application of hydrogen. Regarding passenger vehicles, from the perspective of experts, if we check the progress, besides heavy-duty vehicles, heavy-duty trucks, and the trailers, the EV is very competitive. I believe in the future, regarding the application of hydrogen, the major application scenarios will be chemical, multinational sectors, including shipping. But our pilot projects are making very slow progress. I believe we should pay more attention to these issues. In summary, we are talking about the future role of hydrogen in energy transition, decarbonization. The most application scenarios will be in the industrial sectors, primarily petrochemical, but its application in the transportation sector, according to many estimates, transportation will not be the most important application scenario or sector for hydrogen. Against the backdrop of the energy transitioning, we need to consider the proper role of hydrogen. We are using a lot of hydrogen in petrochemical, but the primary source is green hydrogen. So we need to consider how can we turn the gray hydrogen into green hydrogen instead of thinking about its application in the transportation sector. Besides, we do not only consider about the technological features of hydrogen. What's more important in energy transitioning and carbon neutrality? What are the roles exclusive to hydrogen instead of other sources of energy? Let me set a very simple example. If we consider transportation, passenger vehicle sector, now the electrification is a very obvious trend. EVs become very competitive. The public transportation will be largely dependent on the transportation infrastructure. In the future, the transportation infrastructure will be further developed. If you want to establish another transportation infrastructure featuring hydrogen, I don't think it's very economical and very competitiveness. So we need to consider those special purposes or special usages of the hydrogen. For example, they cannot be replaced by other energy mix or sources. So we need to think about the entry points of hydrogen, considering the practical situation of a country. You cannot resort to different aspects. Let's take Europe, for example. Europe is with well-developed natural gas industries and infrastructure. They have been considered starting the hydrogen development with the hydrogen doping. Besides, I'm also talking about hydrogen as a fuel to the transportation sector. And when you develop the transportation infrastructure, please consider these very special scenarios. So the most important scenario will be the industrial sector, especially how can we decarbonize the green hydrogen in the industrial sector. That is all my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Zhu. And moving on now to hear from Tim Harper, the founder and chief executive officer, Element 2, dealing with hydrogen transportation networks.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, ni hao. I suppose I'd like to give a little bit more of entrepreneurial view on where we're going with hydrogen, because I think one of the things I hear is a lot of people tend to look at it from a theoretical policy perspective, but without really considering where the unmet need is. So when we set up Element 2 almost 3 years ago now, most of the people in the UK were talking about chickens and eggs, from the old saying, which came first, the chicken or the egg. And the reason for that is there were a lot of people wanted to use hydrogen for various things, but a lot of people wanted to supply hydrogen, but nobody was willing to take that first step. And a lot of that just came down to an unwillingness to invest in capital intensive infrastructure when there's an unproven or a very immature market. Now, we looked at this and spoke to a lot of people in the hydrogen business and looked at potential end users of hydrogen, and the end users ranged from people with hydrogen powered cars. There's about 40 or 50 hydrogen powered cars in the UK, so that's not a huge market, all the way up to people wanting to decarbonize heavy industry, steel, ceramics. And the problem you have at that end is there isn't the infrastructure in place to get enough hydrogen into the places where it's needed. The technology for putting it through gas mains isn't quite there, and for the sheer scale that's required, you can't transport it by tube trailers on the road. But we realized that there was a sweet spot for us, and that was in the heavy end of transport, so that's commercial vehicles. And the reason for that is that a lot of people in the transport industry, especially fleet managers, logistics, have already started work on decarbonizing their fleets. And what they're finding is that battery electric is suitable for maybe 20% of the use cases. So the problem with battery electric is, one, you have the issue of range, and the second is the issue of recharging, which means that if you're a logistics company, you have to disrupt your business model. So instead of filling up with diesel for 15 minutes, you've got to find a way of having these trucks static. And it gets even worse than that, because if you want to have a 44 ton heavy goods vehicle, to get 400, 500 kilometers range, you need somewhere around a megawatt, 1.5 megawatts of battery. That will weigh somewhere between 10 and 15 tons, which means that you've immediately lost almost a third of your cargo carrying capacity. So it has a further impact on your business model. So when we spoke to people in the heavy end of transport, they were crying out for something that would allow them to get to net zero and produce zero emissions. Now, it's not just fleet managers wanting to do this, it's also the investors in those companies because of ESG pressures. A lot of investors now are saying to logistics companies, we're not sure if we can actually put our money into your business because your main contribution to the environment is driving up and down roads, emitting greenhouse gases and diesel particles. And of course, the logistics operators are getting the same message from their customers, whether that's consumers or major supermarkets, who once again don't want to be responsible for those emissions. So the solution that everybody was looking for was hydrogen, and there was a need to put in hydrogen refueling infrastructure. Now, we realized very early that the current model of producing hydrogen on site, storing it on site, just wasn't economic. So our business model is very much technology agnostic. So we don't own or take a bet on any technology, and if any of our Chinese colleagues have got a better, more efficient way of storing, transporting, or dispensing hydrogen, we'll be happy to talk to them and displace our existing inefficient suppliers. And we focus solely on building the infrastructure. So we have 30 hydrogen refueling stations under construction, going through planning and construction in the UK. Most of our hydrogen is green. The reason we can do that is that a lot of the sources of hydrogen for that supply the volumes required by the transport industry are from renewables. So by renewables, that's everything from waste to hydrogen all the way through to curtailed electrons, because we do have a big problem in the UK that if you put up a wind farm, you might not be able to actually connect it to the grid for another 4 or 5 years. So hooking that up to an electrolyzer, doing it. But why are we doing this? Well, it's very simple. Almost a third of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, and a third of those come from heavy transport. So rather than the 35 million passenger cars, it's the 600,000 commercial vehicles that are responsible for a third of the emissions from transport. So the faster we can get those off the road and transition them to zero emission technologies, and from our perspective, we don't mind whether it's battery or hydrogen. I think we're always going to have a mixture of energy sources, just as we do at the moment. So that's what we're doing. The reception we have from the fleet managers is very good, and I should add, there's not just fuel cell hydrogen vehicles. There's also hydrogen combustion vehicles being developed by people like JCB and Cummins, and there's also a lot of interest in hybrid systems where you're running vehicles on a blend of hydrogen and diesel, which isn't totally zero emission, but it does two things for you. One is it does cut the tailpipe emissions by 60–70%, but the most important thing for a lot of fleet operators is it does extend the lifetime of their vehicles, because obviously electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles are a lot more expensive than the current diesel. So just to conclude, the reason we're doing this is because there is a climate crisis going on. We've had people demonstrating about it in London all last weekend, and those people are voters, they are consumers, and they are investors in companies. So by rapidly decarbonizing some of the low-hanging areas, such as transport, we can make a real difference very, very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that contribution, looking at this from a business point of view in the UK. Next, I'm going to turn to Dr. Ding Ning, Chief Expert on Energy Research at the China Construction Bank Financial Asset Investment Company. Dr. Ding, over to you.
I will not use the slides to share with us our ideas and observations about the green hydrogen energy. So we know that actually the consumption for the green hydrogen will be about 90 million tons by 2020. China is the largest producer and also consumer of hydrogen in the world, accounting for 1/3 of the global total, increasing by over 30% compared with that of 2022. And the consumption for hydrogen in 2030 will be almost 40 million tons. If we check the consumption mix of the hydrogen, refinery and the petrochemical will be the major consumption sectors. In the short and medium, I believe that will be a very important solution for the industrial use. China is still using the hydrogen in the traditional sectors, which include electricity, transportation. By 2030, I believe the share for the hydrogen in the transportation sector will be about 5%. With the technological advancement and also the lowering production cost, they will be used in the transportation, building, industrial sectors. Now we are considering about the hydrogen production, and These sectors, transportation, electricity, will be the sectors will witness very large scale. Now we are using the synthetic ammonia, methanol, industrial or the petrochemical will be a very important sector for the utilization of hydrogen. PetroChina and the Sinopec are also trying to produce a lot of hydrogen. The yearly output will be about 440 tons per year. To produce a ton of hydrogen, we need a lot of methanol or the other industrial materials. We have very high demands for the industrial raw materials, while the greatest demand will generate a very large market. Besides, we can see the lead for the hydrogen in the petrochemical sector is also on the rise. In transportation sector, up to this point, and we can see we are very concerned about the vehicles, EVs. Actually, we have over 6.7 million fuel cell vehicles. China is with a very large inventory or stock of the fuel cell vehicles. From the perspective of energy storage, according to the 200 megawatts pilot projects in power generation, the cost for the energy storage has been reduced from 0.9 to 0.5 RMB per kilowatt. So I believe these projects will help us to break even and even make some profits. By 2030, with the lowering cost of renewable energy power generation, the cost for the hydrogen storage will be reduced to 0.4 RMB per kilowatt. So I believe that will be very important scenarios for us.
Through natural gas, we can reduce the cost of hydrogen transportation. Now we have 400 million cubic meters of natural gas. That means there will be a huge market in metallurgy, train, aviation. Hydrogen will be used in this area in long future. Alstom, the French company, has a smart train project in China, and China Railway Corporation has also over 20,000 kilometers of a trial project of a smart railway using hydrogen. We believe this is one of the most important industries for carbon reduction. Many European companies and Baosteel and other steel companies are building hydrogen for metallurgy uses, but we believe it will only be commercialized in 2030 and 2035 due to lack of technology. As an investor, we are most concerned about the cost problem of hydrogen. We all know that green hydrogen is very expensive. We believe natural gas only has a cost of $2, and we are targeted at 1.5 RMB or even less. Even if we take the trough electricity tariff as an example, hydrogen-powered electricity will be as high as 2 RMB per kilowatt hour. That's not economical. I think we can only reduce the cost of green energy when the electricity used to generate hydrogen can be ignored. Given the abundant resources of solar and wind power in northeast China and southeast China, we can reduce the cost of hydrogen. We believe we still have a long way to go. There are different pathways, hydrogen plus solar energy, through some combinations of wind, solar, and hydrogen power. if we can raise it to 4,000 hours per year, then the cost would be reduced to 11 RMB. We believe when the levelized cost of green hydrogen is 0.1 or 0.15 RMB, that will make it very competitive. But we can increase the installed capacity, we can increase the efficiency per unit, we can reduce the manufacturing cost of hydrogen to 15 to 18 RMB. With a better carbon market, there would be an advantage for scrapped hydrogen. Now, the carbon price in China is only 50 RMB per ton, but when it increases to 200 RMB, same as Europe, then the hydrogen cost will be over 20 RMB. Then green hydrogen will have a clear advantage. The green hydrogen projects in China, especially after the national plan on installed capacity was rolled out last year, by 2025, renewable energy in China will see a newly added capacity of 200 tons per year. By 2025, green hydrogen will surpass 800,000. That's much higher than expectation. In Q1, there were 23 hydrogen projects, all of them being green hydrogen. China invested 55 billion RMB, and there are projects with 400,000 billion RMB being planned. The main users include the main cities using a lot of new energy. They're concentrating in eastern China. In North China, there are hydrogen storage projects, and in eastern China, there are hydrogen generated by solar power and offshore wind. In terms of policy support, in 2022, the mid to long-term development plan for new energy made it clear that hydrogen-powered vehicle will be 50,000 vehicles. And we think it's important that the development strategy will be green hydrogen plus gray hydrogen. In China, on the one hand, we believe more locations will be made available for hydrogen. It was previously managed as a hazardous chemicals requiring license. But since last year, many cities in China have launched policies allowing companies to build up hydrogen projects in specific locations, providing more development upstream. In China, different governments give different levels of subsidy to green hydrogen projects. For example, discounted electricity tariff or quota for solar and wind power. We believe all this policy support will benefit the future development of energy hydrogen in China. We believe investors will offer diversified capital support. As a commercial bank, we are looking at capital-intensive, low-risk projects. For example, generation of hydrogen coupled with utility-scale PV power stations. Of course, we need more relaxed regulations when it comes to pipelines and storage cans. These are also what our bank is interested in. We will support some technological companies featuring R&D, including new energy batteries and electrolyzers. We're also talking about storage facilities, pressurizer, catalyst, etc. And we are also looking at fuel cells, liquefied high nitrogen, and other cutting-edge technologies in other possible investment projects. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, and sorry for the technical glitch.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And but first of all, just to invite Markus Axenberger from H2 Stiftung to give a brief explanation of how H2 Stiftung is trying to create markets in hydrogen. Markus.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. It's the H2 Global Foundation, or the H2 Global Stiftung. So that's the brand and that's the name. But thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much to Mr. Schüss. I see you are in the call today. So Mr. Schüss is one of the first supporters of the H2 Global idea. It was developed 2.5 years ago just to overcome this chicken and egg problem, why nobody is investing in H2. Because it is not bankable, you cannot bind your finance on it. So H2 Global was developed 2.5 years ago, like I said, to overcome this chicken and egg problem. It is a very defined system. It is defined by size and defined by time. The German government and the Dutch government provided already 6 billion euro for these supporting mechanisms. So we are now executing H2 Global. It is based on the contracts for difference mechanism, just to make sure that these very high prices now for the production of green hydrogen needs to be covered, because you cannot get, let's say, the amount of money on the sales side, and there is a price gap, and that needs to be covered. Everything H2 Global is doing is very competitive based. So we have a so-called double auction mechanism to make sure that it is as smart as possible and as cost efficient as possible. I will show you how it looked like. So what H2 Global is now doing, we started already in December with the first auctioning process. So we are auctioning now green hydrogen derivatives. Means green hydrogen as ammonia, green hydrogen within, or as green methanol, and green synthetic air fuels, with a whole amount of 300 million euro each. Whoever provides the best price, so the lowest price, will get the strike. Strike means they will get from our company. It is called Hinco Hydrogen Intermediary Network Company, but will provide a contract with a guaranteed and fixed price over the period of 10 years. Hinco will not store these products, because all these products needs to be physically delivered to Europe, to a so-called triangle between the harbor of Hamburg, the harbor of Antwerp, and the harbor of Duisburg. So we want to have these products physically in Europe. It is a global auction, but Hinco will not store these products. Of course, Hinco will sell these products into the European market as short as possible. So just with the short-term contracts, 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months, as short as possible, just to make sure that we can make use of these upcoming increase of prices. So what you can see here on the flat line on top, this is the guaranteed price by Hinco, provided for the period of 10 years. So whoever wins or whoever gets the strike, whoever will be awarded out of this auction, can really bind his finance on it, because we are backed by the German and by the Dutch government. So Hinco is really acting as a AAA or as a blue chip investor on the market. So what we expect within the next couple of years is increasing prices because of upcoming regulation, because of upcoming willingness to pay higher prices for green hydrogen products or green hydrogen derivatives. We don't know exactly when it will match. So we expect it will be within the next couple of years. What is Hinco as well doing? So we are reducing the risks in the market, because all these uncertainties in regard of how a product should look like, certification, standardization. So we have set our own standards. We have set our own certification scheme. It is absolutely, and I would say 99.99% in line now, what was already, presented now by the European Commission in regard of delegated act and in regard of RED 2 and of an upcoming RED 3. So this is something what H2 Global provides as well, reducing the risks for all market, for all participants within the market, the production side and the offtake side. What H2 Global is, what we are doing, we are working in a so-called window logic. Whoever provides funds to H2 Global, so using the H2 Global mechanism to cover these price gaps, needs to define precisely for what kind of product, for what kind of region, within what kind of criteria, and so on. It is not a decision made by the H2 Global Foundation or by the HINCO. It is always the decision made by the provider of the funds. So the first contribution window within the amount of 900 million euros was provided with funds by the German government. And they selected precisely the criteria, the products, etc. The second contribution window will have the amount of 3.53 billion euro, as well provided with funds by the German government. The third contribution window will have the amount of 1.4 billion euro. This is as well German government's money, but just for the purpose of synthetic fuels for the shipping and for the airline sector. The fourth contribution window is made now for the Dutch government. They will define precisely for what kind of purpose, for what kind of product, and so on. I can see a hand is raised. Yes. Shall I be quicker or?
Yes, quick. If you could be very quick, please, Marcus. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, I will do so. So we are doing that as well for other governments. For the Australian government, we are in cooperation now with the Japanese government. With the Japanese government, not with the Chinese, with the Japanese government, with the United Arab Emirates, and with different other countries in Europe. We developed an additional or a second mechanism now for the US government. They asked us for such kind of concept. This is now a second concept beside the IRA, the H2 Global Foundation, just my last word. This is organized and done because what we have needed was a very independent body to execute H2 Global, the concept and the idea. We have now already 60 funders, let's say more or less most of the big companies who are dealing with hydrogen worldwide. And we are growing week by week. So I'm happy if you would like to have more information to send out all documents and more information about H2 Global. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's very useful. And just maybe over for a last word to Michael. Sorry, we've run slightly over time due to the technical problems. But Michael, would you just like to round things off?
Yes, again, our apologies. Normally we do like to have a bit of conversation here, but we've had some input from the audience. And as Michael says, we'll be circulating slides. Just in terms of two other points, we are gearing up here in London for next month's Net Zero Delivery Summit. That'll be held on the 24th of May. So anybody coming through London, please let us know. We'll try and get you access to the Guildhall event being run by the City of London Corporation. Zien Long Finance and with the sponsorship of Xterra and the cooperation of the Aviva investors will be hosting an event as well on the Tuesday, the 23rd of May in the afternoon. And again, any of you coming over, please do let us know. That's going to be looking at a new global financial architecture to support preventing climate change. So a lot happening here in London. As ever, check out the website. And our sincere thanks to all of you for your contributions and for listening.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for your contributions this afternoon, and goodbye.